If you're watching this video the day it goes up on YouTube, then it's October 31st. While I typically drop new cases on a Monday at the moment, I wanted to give you something spooky to sit down and watch this chilly Halloween evening. Both supernatural and historical true crime cases are among the most popular my channel currently covers. So this Halloween, I thought we'd combine them both and go back more than 2 centuries to 1809, when a 40-year-old witch, Mary Bateman, was executed in front of a crowd of thousands at York Castle in England. But unlike the many cases where women were falsely accused, Mary openly practiced witchcraft and used her supernatural abilities and magical concoctions to instill fear in and take advantage of her victims, earning her the nickname the Yorkshire Witch. Living nearly 100 years after England had stopped executing witches, Mary was allowed to sell her services and practice her craft freely. Well, that is until the authorities discovered the string of robberies, poisonings, and brutal murders that she had left in her wake. After her hanging, Mary's body was put on public display and viewed by 2,500 visitors, before strips of her supposedly magical skin were turned into leather and sold as charms to protect against evil spirits. Up until recently, Mary's skeleton was on display in the Thackeray Museum of Medicine in Leeds, where many have claimed her spirit still walks the halls of the old building at night searching for new victims. So this Halloween, let's find out what Mary did to suffer from this dark fate, how she managed to convince thousands of people she was a powerful witch, and why many believe her ghost still lingers to this very day. This is the creepy story of Much of what we know about Mary's life comes from the extraordinary life and character of Mary Bateman, published shortly after her trial and execution. Born Mary Harker in 1768 to a respectable farming family in Isenby, North Yorkshire, Mary displayed signs of her future sly and deceitful nature from an early age. For example, at the young age of 5, she attempted to sell shoes she had been stealing and hiding in the barn over a number of weeks. By the time she was 12, Mary began working as a domestic servant in the nearby town of Thirsk, where she was expected to stay until she married and started her own family. However, Mary quickly lost the job after being caught stealing from her employer. Also caught stealing in multiple similar roles, she moved between several employers throughout her teenage years, and had soon been fired from so many jobs that no one would hire her anymore. Eventually, she was able to secure a role as a dressmaker in Leeds with the help of a family friend. But this job producing clothing paid very poorly. So to supplement her income, Mary not only continued committing petty thefts, but also began dabbling in witchcraft, which quickly became her main source of income. In this role, she offered fortune-telling, brewed love potions, and claimed to remove evil wishes for local servant girls and their employers. By 1792, at 24 years old, Mary met and married a wheelwright called John Bateman after just 3 weeks of courtship. However, less than 2 months into their marriage, he began to regret his hasty decision when he discovered Mary's hidden life of crime. With the pair having moved into a boarding home until they could sort a permanent house for themselves, he discovered that she had been stealing from the other lodgers in the building. But rather than turning his wife in, John covered up her crimes, and the couple swiftly found a house to move to. Not long after, Mary forged various letters claiming to be from reputable clients she pretended she was working for, and used them to acquire dresses and goods from stores, claiming the clients would pay for them, before selling them on for profit. She even tricked her husband into believing that his father, the Thirsk town crier, was gravely ill. While he was away attending to his father, Mary sold their clothes and furniture to settle a debt she owed to one of her victims. Carrying out numerous scams to make money, Mary evaded prosecution by convincing her husband to constantly move to new towns, even after the pair became parents. In the handful of times she was arrested and accused of crimes, Mary managed to escape punishment by bribing witnesses. What role, if any, John played in his wife's crimes is unclear, though at the very least his actions enabled her. At one point, John enlisted in the army. While many accounts claim he did this to get away from his wife, as he'd been driven mad by her constant scams and crimes, in reality, Mary went with him, and within only a year they had returned to Leeds together. By 1799, Mary had set up shop out of their new home in Marsh Lane near Quarry Hill, where she quickly established a reputation as a wise woman, a type of witch that combined Christian prayers with their charms and spells, rather than a traditional witch adhering to pagan beliefs. With little understanding of medicine in those days, many turned to witchcraft for help, and Mary was more than happy to exploit this belief, tricking vulnerable individuals out of their money and possessions with false prophecies and questionable potions. She offered a variety of services as a wise woman, such as helping people locate lost items, treating ailments, healing animals, and even influencing the weather. She convinced one woman that her husband was facing a death sentence in jail, duping her into giving Mary 4 gold pieces for her supposed help. Another woman, believing her husband was being unfaithful, handed over everything she owned to Mary, in hopes of her spells fixing her predicament. Then, in 1805, Mary began boasting that she owned a hen that was able to predict the end of the world. According to her, the hen would lay eggs inscribed with phrases like, "Christ is coming." But obviously Mary didn't let the public see this magical hen for free, charging them a penny to come and look at the prophet hen of Leeds. And according to some accounts, by this point her husband was sharing in the profits of her unethical activities. Many people witnessed the hen laying these prophetic eggs, believing it to be a true miracle. Yet when she eventually sold the animal to a neighbor, it never laid anything other than normal eggs. Later investigations revealed that Mary had written on the eggs using ink before reinserting them into the hen's oviduct. Around this time, Mary attended gatherings led by Joanna Southcott, a Christian prophet predicting the imminent end of the world. She soon began using Joanna's name to lend credibility to her own practices, even though she had no permission to do so. Mary also relied heavily on her connections with 2 famous wise women who helped guide and mentor her, known as Mrs. Moore and Mrs. Blythe. According to Mary, Mrs. Moore was the 7th child of a 7th child and possessed the ability to supernaturally blind anyone who posed a threat to her clients, and Mrs. Blythe was a psychic who could read the stars. Before long, clients began flocking to Mary's home, paying her to send letters to these 2 wise women to solve their issues or reveal their futures. Mary would then charge her clients for the remedies the 2 women recommended for them. In essence, Mary became a storefront for these 2 soothsayers, selling a range of magical potions and charms that they claimed could repel curses, ward off evil, and even cure illnesses. Disturbingly, several reports also claim that Mary worked as a back-alley abortionist at the time, which was an extremely shady and dangerous job that frequently resulted in significant harm and even death to those who received treatment. Mary skillfully orchestrated her deceptions. She sought out the anxious and the sick, promising magical solutions to their troubles. With her seemingly kind demeanor and her supposed powerful connections, Mary rarely lacked customers. While these enterprises proved lucrative, it seems that Mary's ambition, combined with her complete lack of morality, led her down an even darker path, one that was about to transition from witchcraft and robbery to outright murder. Mary's first known victims were 3 women from the Kitchen family. She began by befriending them, occasionally assisting in their drapery shop in St. Peter's Square in Quarry Hill. Mary also offered to tell their fortunes, using insights from Mrs. Blythe. When one of the women fell ill from an unknown ailment, Mary took it upon herself to nurse her better, administering special powders she had concocted. Tragically, all 3 women soon died. Mary attributed their deaths to the plague, and out of fear of contagion, and fear of crossing Mary, the local community remained silent. When creditors later investigated the Kitchen estate, they found the drapery shop and home stripped of their contents, with the account books mysteriously missing. The investigative processes of the time were far less thorough than today, and her explanation went unchallenged, sparing her from any further inquiries, at least for the time. Similarly, another act of poisoning that occurred around the same time was later linked back to Mary, though no proof actually exists that she was behind it. A poor family with several children stumbled across a cake which they all hungrily ate, only to fall violently sick. Thankfully, all of them survived, but when authorities checked the cake, they discovered it had been laced with arsenic. There are many similar cases in the area that occurred at this time, some of which resulted in death. Whether Mary was behind any of these poisonings will never truly be known. Then, in 1806, now operating out of her new home in the aptly named Black Dog Yard, Mary found a pair of new clients in William and Rebecca Perigo, a wealthy and childless couple who sought out her help after believing Rebecca was suffering from a curse. Rebecca had complained about a fluttering sensation in her chest and claimed to be haunted by a black dog and other spirits, with some indication that she suffered from psychosis. Initially, the couple had visited a quack doctor who told them that her condition was incurable as it wasn't medical, telling them that it was an evil wish that required witchcraft to resolve. Rebecca's niece, aware of Mary's reputation as a healer with supernatural powers, recommended that they contact her to see if she could help them. So the Perigos went to visit Mary, who told them about Mrs. Blythe and her belief that the wise woman could fix their problems. After sending a letter to Mrs. Blythe, she told them that they needed to give Mary 4 guinea notes to post out to her, and in exchange Mary would sew 4 guinea notes Mrs. Blythe had provided into a silk purse and place it inside their bed. She told them that they needed to leave the charms untouched for at least 18 months, else they wouldn't work. Leaving the couple's home, Mary told them to visit her regularly, as she would be receiving letters from Mrs. Blythe with guidance on how to further help them to remove their curse. Around 2 weeks later, a new letter arrived, instructing the couple to nail 2 horseshoe-shaped pieces of iron to their door, using the back of a pair of pincers. The trusting Perigos, thankful that they were finally receiving help, obliged. Over the preceding months, Mrs. Blythe sent the Perigos constant letters through Mary, instructing them to provide various magical supplies, including money, china, silverware, cheese, sugar, tea, bed linens, and even a substantial amount of money. More than would be earned annually by most skilled workers at the time. All of these items and finances, it was claimed, would be used to create spells and cures for the couple's curse, and they were ordered to burn each letter they read once they had given over the goods to Mary, to avoid evil spirits reading them and counteracting them. Blindly trusting Mary and Mrs. Blythe, the couple were too afraid not to follow the instructions, with many of the letters threatening danger should they fail to do so. Then, in April 1808, the couple received a letter from Mrs. Blythe warning that a terrible illness was about to befall them, and that they needed to bring Mary 1/2 pound of honey for her to mix with a special substance for them to create puddings that would cure them. The letter warned them that no matter what happened, they were not to seek medical help, and that they had to dispose of any unfinished pudding. Should they fail to adhere strictly to the instructions, the letter warned that they would both die. So following the instructions, the couple ate the puddings on the exact days and at the exact times they were told to. For the first 5 days, the puddings tasted normal, but when they ate the 6th pudding, the taste was so foul that William could only manage a single bite of it. Rebecca, on the other hand, forced herself to eat her entire pudding, scared of the repercussions if she didn't. The couple were both immediately struck with severe vomiting after eating the final pudding. Despite enduring unbearable pain, Rebecca refused to let her husband send for a doctor, fearing doing so would break the spell. While William's lips turned black and he suffered horrific headaches and abdominal pain, he gradually began to get better. In stark contrast, his wife grew sicker and sicker before finally passing away in agony on May 24th. Reports from that time described her as having a severely swollen tongue and distorted features when she died. Yet despite all this, William didn't even consider that the puddings, let alone Mary or Mrs. Blythe, were behind his sickness and his wife's death. Instead, he saw it as proof that the letter's threat of illness befalling them, and leading to death if they failed to perfectly follow its instructions, was all real. After Rebecca's death, a surgeon was called to examine her body, and strongly suspected she had been poisoned, especially when he learned that a cat had also died after eating some of the leftover pudding, but no further investigation was pursued. By October, however, after continuing to correspond with Mary and her guide, and continuing to purchase various requested items, the initial 18 months William had been told not to touch the charms under his bed had come and passed. Wanting to see if the charms were really working, he decided to check them, expecting to find guinea notes sewn into silk purses in the bed. Instead, he discovered nothing but rotten cabbage leaves, and the tragic truth dawned on him. Every single interaction with Mary and Mrs. Blythe had been a lie. Realizing he had been deceived and that his wife had been poisoned, William arranged a meeting with Mary, pretending to be interested in purchasing more potions from Mrs. Blythe. In reality, he contacted the police, telling them Mary had murdered his wife and arranged for them to arrest her at the meeting. Mary arrived with a bottle containing a mixture of oatmeal and arsenic, presumably intended to finish off William since the pudding had failed. When the police rushed out to apprehend her, she tried to claim that William had been trying to sell the potion to her, not the other way around. But the police knew she was lying and hastily arrested her. Despite her claims of innocence, a quick search of her home uncovered various items that the Perigos had given her to send to Mrs. Blythe. All of them had been kept and used by Mary herself. They also discovered various poisons, including a deadly mixture of mercuric chloride, which had been put into the pudding that killed Rebecca. This time, even Mary's smooth talking couldn't save her, and she was taken to York Castle, where she was formally charged with the murder of Rebecca Perigo. In the early 1800s, courts only held trials at a handful of points through the year, meaning prisoners often had to wait for their cases to be heard. So although Mary was arrested in October 1808, her trial didn't occur until March 1809. During her trial, Mary tried to pin the blame on the elusive Mrs. Blythe, but her defense was quickly dismissed when the prosecution easily proved that Mrs. Blythe, alongside all of Mary's other supernatural contacts, never even existed. It soon became apparent that all of the letters sent to the Perigos had been written by Mary herself, with the supposed Mrs. Blythe's handwriting being identical to Mary's own. Mary had been charging postage to send letters to her imaginary guides, pocketing the money, forging responses, and then keeping whatever goods the fake letters demanded in a scam she had been running for years. Numerous witnesses testified to her long history of fraud, robbery, and other criminal activities, with the prosecution even bringing out shop owners who had sold arsenic to her in the past. As witnesses came forward from all over Leeds to recount their experiences of deception and extortion at Mary's hands, it quickly became clear that her crimes extended far beyond what had initially been understood by the court. It seemed clear to many that Mary had been behind the deaths of the Kitchen family a couple of years earlier, and was likely intending to loot and rob the Perigos after their deaths as she had done to them. The most damning testimony came from the surgeon who had re-examined Rebecca's body, who confirmed that the remains of the pudding contained a lethal dose of poison, with the symptoms exhibited by the Perigos perfectly matching those of mercury poisoning, with evidence clearly showing that Rebecca had been deliberately poisoned by Mary. After a short deliberation, the jury returned with a guilty verdict, leading the judge to state the following: "Of your guilt, there cannot remain a particle of doubt in the breast of anyone who has heard your case. For crimes like yours, in this world, the gates of mercy are closed." The judge then sentenced her to death by hanging. When questioned if she had anything to say in response to her sentence, Mary made the shocking claim that she was pregnant so she could not be killed. In response, many women in the courtroom tried to leave, as they knew they could be called to serve as a jury of matrons. This jury would be responsible for determining whether Mary was telling the truth, as the law at the time stated that if a woman was found to be at least 4.5 months pregnant, her execution would be postponed until after childbirth. So the judge ordered the doors of the courtroom to be locked, allowing him to select 12 married women from the crowd to be the jury of matrons. Mary was then taken to another room, where the 12 women quickly determined that her claim was false, allowing her to be taken back to prison to await her execution. While in prison, a reverend attempted to get Mary to confess to her crimes, but she refused to admit to anything, showing no signs of remorse, guilt, or shame. Despite being outed as a liar and con artist in court, Mary continued to present herself as a witch to her fellow prisoners. She even managed to convince a young female inmate who wished to see her sweetheart that if she let her sew money into a charm for her to wear, she could ensure her partner would visit. The young woman was able to find and pay the money, but her sweetheart never appeared. When she opened the charm, she discovered that the money had mysteriously disappeared. After finding out what she'd done, the prison governor intervened and ordered Mary to refund the amount she hadn't already spent. On the day before her execution, she wrote a letter to her husband, enclosing her wedding ring which she requested he pass on to their daughter. In the letter, she confessed to her fraudulent actions, but asserted that she had never intended for anyone to die. Even on the morning of her execution, Mary refused to admit her guilt or accept that her sentence was justified. Instead, she remained composed as she ascended the gallows. A profound silence fell over the large crowd that had gathered to witness the execution, with many superstitious onlookers believing Mary might use her supernatural powers to somehow escape death at the last moment. But when the noose tightened, she did not vanish. Just before the drop, the Reverend urged her again to confess, but Mary reiterated that she was innocent. So the lever was pulled, and Mary met her end on March 20th, 1809. Meanwhile, back in Leeds, 2,500 residents had each paid 3 pence to view her body upon its return to the town. The crowds, entertained by jugglers and balladeers, waited late into the night, eating and drinking from vendors selling pies and ale. At midnight, the hearse finally arrived, and people lined up to get a look at the body. Afterward, her corpse was taken to Leeds General Hospital for dissection. Mary's body was skinned after the dissection, being scraped and tanned, with the skin being sold in small pieces as macabre talismans to ward off evil. In fact, her skin was even used to bind several books, including at least one that was reportedly owned by the future King George IV. Referred to as the Yorkshire Witch for obvious reasons, many of the residents of Yorkshire believed Mary had likely been responsible for many more murders beyond that of Rebecca and the 3 Kitchen family members. And because of this, she is frequently referred to as a serial killer. Mary's skeleton remained on display in the Thackeray Museum of Medicine in Leeds until recently, where it has been claimed that her spirit haunts the halls of the old building in search of new victims. Interestingly, Mary's ghost is only one of many claimed to haunt the halls of the Thackeray Museum of Medicine, with some other famous sightings including a 19th century woman known as the Grey Lady, and a white-coated doctor who's said to linger within the recreated Victorian streets in the museum. There have been countless reports of visitors hearing knocking and banging, being grabbed by ghostly hands, and experiencing rapid drops in temperature and intense feelings of dread and discomfort. The location is so popular among ghost hunters that it was even once featured in an episode of Most Haunted. And with that, our bonus Halloween episode comes to a close. So, what did you think of this historic supernatural case? Was it one you'd heard of before today? Let me know your thoughts on it down in the comments section below. As always, thanks so much for watching. If you enjoyed this video, please drop a like, consider subscribing and checking out my brand new Patreon, and be sure to comment down below as it really helps with the algorithm here on YouTube. You have been watching The Mystery Abyss.